internet never forgets, but more people are starting to say that it should. I'm Femi Okay.
I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in The Stream. Today we're discussing the right to be forgotten online. Have you ever wished that you could delete something off of the internet about yourself?
Yes.
Tell us about it via Twitter or in our live YouTube chat.
Racist tweets, drunken Facebook photos, tactless email. In today's digitally connected world, these things can come back to haunt you years into the future. With a Google search influencing everything from job offers to relationships, more people are pushing for control over their digital history.
The European Union has addressed these concerns by granting residents the right to be forgotten on search engines. But this privacy law hasn't really been adopted anywhere else. That's why Europe's top court recently ruled that Google doesn't have to block search results in any countries outside of the Union.
The ruling is a big win for free speech proponents who say that Europe's law goes against the public's right to factual information. But with lawsuits to remove embarrassing information popping up all over the world, the debate over the right to be forgotten is heating up.
So joining us to discuss today's topic is Jamie Court from Los Angeles, California. Jamie is president of the nonprofit group Consumer Watchdog, which is pushing for the U.S. to adopt the right to be forgotten. With us in the studio is Seema Sueko. She is the director of a new play in Washington, D.C., dealing with this exact subject. It's called The Right to be Forgotten.
We're also joined by Danny O'Brien. Danny is the Director of Strategy for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, a digital rights nonprofit based in San Francisco, California. And finally, from Faro, Portugal, Frankie Beats, a right to be forgotten advocate who speaks from personal experience. Good to have you here, everybody. Danny, can you imagine a situation where there is something online about you, about someone you care deeply about, that you wish you could take off and you have no ability to do that?
I don't need to imagine. I have plenty of stuff online that I wish would go away, and I've definitely had friends who are in the same situation. The tricky thing is, though, as everybody knows, it's really very difficult to get something offline. Yeah. And I think as people try and introduce laws and proposals to deal with that, they risk introducing a principle that doesn't work,
right,
that still leaves the content online, or they go too far and you end up with an incredibly draconian style regulation that can end up being used by the rich and the powerful to really change history.
So what do we do then? We do nothing?
I think that we can continue to work this out, right? I think that we can, apart from anything else, I think a lot of the things that people are most concerned about, and this is what we saw in the European right to be forgotten, is Google search entries, right? When people think about searching these days, they think about Google, the large giant company that controls what the top 10 things that you see about somebody are.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of power for one company to have, and I don't think the right to be forgotten actually fixes that, because what it really means is that now Google still decides whether your content is delisted from their top 10.
That's just not right. I mean, this law is specifically targeted and designed to hit Google. Google accepts requests in EU to not remove things online. This isn't about removing things on this line. This is removing things from the top of Google's search history, so that when you have a family like the Pitsouris family who had a picture of their decapitated daughter in a car accident leaked online by the California Highway Patrol, and it became the thing when their family's name was searched that came up all the time. When that family went to Google and wanted to say, hey, can you take that out of the search algorithm so it's not on the first search page, not offline, but not on the first search history, Google said no. So the right to be forgotten is all about telling Google and search engines only that you can't prioritize results that are for non-public figures. These are for the families who want their privacy. Information that got there wrongly, or information that is irrelevant to a non-public figure's like a nude picture of a English teacher who got fired because that nude picture showed up in a student search. So this is targeted directly towards Google because of its info monopoly.
Jamie, it's so interesting. Jamie and Danny, I hear your point there, and I think it's so interesting that we mentioned Google because so much of this has to do with the search engines. So we asked our community their thoughts on that in particular via this poll. Do you think people should have the right to have Google remove content about themselves from search listings? Overwhelmingly, 85% people said yes. The poll is still open, so those of you watching can go vote now. But Frankie, you reached out to the stream via this hashtag we're using. What would your answer to this question be?
Well, for me, I'm coming at it from a personal perspective in that I am one of those people that is on Google for the wrong reasons, for historic issues, where criminal kind of stuff a long time ago. And at the time, the court reports weren't very accurate and they were very one-sided and they didn't include appeals or anything like that. And I just went online and it stayed there. It was very frustrating for me, but I knew that I was going to better myself and get out there and work hard and prove to everybody that I wasn't that person. And I've done that, and I've spent the last 6-7 years working very hard. I'm working as a radio broadcaster in Portugal. I've won global awards. I've got interest from huge radio stations, and still there's not a week that doesn't go by when somebody sends something from Google to my employers or to advertisers, or trolls start to abuse me, or I get turned down for a job at the last minute, or I can't rent a house, and it's been ongoing. And there's a balance there because people make mistakes and they deserve to be punished, which I was. But the punishment has carried on now digitally, and it's still ongoing. And my last offence was January 2011.
Frankie, I Googled you, sorry, I couldn't help it. So I Googled you, and this is what I found. On the first page, your story is right out there, how Frankie Shanley went from a criminal in Ireland, and you can click on that, and that tells us the story that you just told us. Then there's your Twitter, and then here is the start of when it gets quite colourful. No more criminal records, Ireland, the Sunday Times. Ireland's greatest con men. That's you. And then if I go a couple more pages in, it tells me some incredible stories, like a car you borrowed permanently, and there's a gentleman jumped on the bonnet of the car and you drove the car. That gentleman happened to be a policeman. Is that true? Did that happen?
Absolutely not.
It didn't happen.
No.
So that's there in your search. I'm looking at that thinking, wow, who is this guy?
Yeah, well, you see, and I was never described as Ireland's greatest conman either. This is the problem.
Okay.
One journalist says, "Is he Ireland's greatest conman?" And this was like 12 years ago or something, 10 years ago. He said, "Is he?" But because of the way people look at Google, and then it became, he is Ireland's greatest conman.
Yeah, that's
then
your
it just
title.
snowballed.
Right.
Yeah, horrible title to have, but
Frankie,
I was never actually called it.
Frankie, it's really interesting to hear your story. This is Seema in the studio. And this play that I've directed here at Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., called Right to be Forgotten, asks precisely the question that you sort of have going on in your life. This question of how do these very human things of forgiveness or second chances, how do they coexist with technology, with the internet? Can we forgive and give second chances with a technology that is permanent? And thus, with that permanence, unforgiving and unforgetting. And in your case, and in the case of the story in our play, untruths are also then added on to what was your original offense. So I'm heartbroken by your story.
I think that's the point of the right to be forgotten, though. What's happened to his story is there's a corporate robot that says a lot of people really love this, so let's put it on the first page. Or that decapitated picture, hey, got all those hits, let's put it on and there is no mediation with that corporation about our human values, our social mores, our ethical customs as a people. And this is part of a larger trend. We have to have laws that allow us to petition. All this does is allow us to petition Google to say, this is wrong, please take it down. It doesn't say Google has to take it down. It allows a petition to be heard and to be given its fair due because, frankly, Google doesn't care about that law.
I don't want Google to be the judge in those sort of decisions, right? Like this, what we've created.
But it
here
already
is
sort of is, right? Based on
it is.
what search comes up first, how things are indexed. So it already is your judge and adjudicator there.
And executioner.
Exactly. I have a question for the three of you. I'm really curious. You know, some say the internet is this wild beast that's taken over us, and others will say it's merely a reflection of our human nature. So, you know, as I ask this question about humanity and technology, about can we forgive on the internet, is it really just a reflection of who we are as human beings, that we as humans have forgotten how to forgive, and instead we run to blame, shame, and tearing people down, revenge rather than forgiveness. So I'm curious what the three of you would think about that.
All you have to do is look at the comments on any of the newspapers, and you know, people get very aggressive. And I mean, years ago, if you had a problem with something, you know, you'd say it to your neighbor, you'd give out about somebody, and that would be it. But nowadays, you get on your keyboard, you type it online, and unfortunately, it's there forever this time. So it's not just a throwaway comment that's made. It's there forever, and other people use that.
So here's another answer to that question. I want to jump in here, bring in our community who are watching live, another answer to the question from Joe, in a way. He says, I believe being able to control the narratives of your life should be a fundamental human right. There are certain things, such as criminal actions, that I do believe should be documented, but there are plenty of other non-criminal things that should be our right to control. And he goes on to say, I'll read one more tweet from him. He sent us a whole thread of really interesting things, but I'll end with this one. He says, what were you doing when you were a teenager? Would you like all of those things to go public? There are periods in our lives where we're learning and mistakes happen. It is the ability to have these experiences and learn without condemnation and permanent marks that allow us to grow. So, Danny, I'll give this one to you. His point there in the beginning about criminal actions being the line, where do you fall on that?
I think that actually the idea that any individual can reshape what people think about them and what people know about them is a pretty risky line to be walking through. You know, if we look at the Me Too movement, if we look at the situations where powerful people have been able to silence others who are criticizing them, or remove from the history books what actual facts about them, that gives them an incredible power that I don't think we should assume is a right. I do think that we need to be able to develop, in the face of more and more information, a greater tolerance for people's past mistakes. And honestly, I think we're kind of moving in that direction as all of us have grown up with the internet. We're getting to the point where we realize that the minor infractions in the past shouldn't prevent a political career, for instance. But the idea that the solution to this is, rather than learning tolerance, sort of medically excise true facts about people so that no one will ever know, is something that really, really concerns me. And in particular, to go back to an idea that I think we all agree with, which is that a big company like Google shouldn't be the only deciding factor. I will reiterate that when people petition Google as though it's the king of the internet, it's still Google that makes this decision, and that's a huge. We're removing courts from this equation. We're removing any kind of redress from the journalists, for instance, who write those articles. Like, under the existing.
Wait. Say this is an important point, though. Journalists, when they write, are held to a standard. Okay, it's a legal standard for which they can be sued. And the problem is, we have on the internet with Google and other content hosted by a third party absolutely no legal liability. The Communications Decency Act.
That's not true.
Section 230.
That's not true, Jamie, and you know
because
it.
It is absolutely true. And last year we got the first liability for online child sex trafficking. Then companies that traffic in online sex are now liable. And you know what? Google opposed that. You know why Google opposed it? Because it believes anything done on the internet is free speech, even trafficking in children. And that is not accurate.
Jamie, can I push back on this? Because we actually represent some of the people who've been affected by Sesta Foster, by that law. You know what happened after that law passed? I think you do. What happened is that sex workers, people who communicate online about the huge risks they face, were all instantly removed from these systems
You know what
because
happened to the
Google
families?
and these companies. No.
What happened to the families who were trapped?
Gentlemen, this is fascinating. I'm going to just break it up for just a second because I want to show our audience who do not live in Europe and have not had need to ask Google if they could take something down. Have a look here on my laptop. There is a way in Europe, there's a privacy law, so you can request to delist something about you that's online, and then this is the form that you use, and then you put your personal information here, you put the URL, maybe you add some other files, etc., and then you put in a request. Frankie, why would this not have helped you?
I'm 4 years filling in those forms and sending them to Google, and each year they move the goalposts. The first year I took it on the chin. I was like, okay, I committed the crimes. Yeah, there was depression involved, but I still committed them, so I took it on the chin. They said, Google says we'll look at it next year. And in fairness, they were communicating, which was good.
Yeah.
The second year, they said it was in the public interest to leave it there. The third year, I got the data commissioner in Ireland involved, and she couldn't get anywhere. And this year, Google said that, well, there's one positive story there now, so we don't need to remove anything negative.
Huh.
I would say in this case, though, you are becoming a public figure as well. What I'm really concerned about is people who aren't public figures, people who get fired, people who get discriminated, people who can't rent an apartment because Google prioritizes a search result that's still going to be on the internet if they don't put it at the top of the algorithm, and all you're saying to Google is move it down. Now, I do have a lot of sympathy for your story, but you're obviously a vocal voice. There are a lot of people who don't have a voice, and that's what this law is really
Jamie,
out there.
I would love to, you've mentioned the Katsaurus family quite a bit, and that's the family who had a tragedy in their family where one of their family members was killed in a horrific way. They spoke about this event on a documentary and about how they were unable to get the pictures of their family member offline, and these were horrific pictures. Have a listen to their experience trying to deal with the right to be forgotten challenges that they are right now. Have a look.
We were told there was nothing that could be done because there's no law in place for pictures of deceased people, because when they pass away, their privacy rights go with them.
I didn't know such depravity existed in humans. And I think dogs treat their kind better than humans treat their kind. It's just, there is no dignity or respect on the internet because we're not held accountable. Nobody's there to tell us not to.
Seema, this is such a robust debate. We're in it right now, and it's been going on globally for some time. Your experience from directing a play called The Right to be Forgotten, you're having conversations, you're having panels yourself. What are you learning? Where do you fall on this? Should we be able to delete some things from our personal histories online?
As I've been working on this play, my own personal opinion has flip-flopped back and forth. But where I stand right now is, yes, I do think we actually should have the capability to have some power over how we are represented, particularly if you're a regular human being, not a public official.
Yeah.
But I also think, you know, the miracle in this play is the miracle of humanity. There is a character in this play who makes a choice of her own critical thought.
Right.
Despite what she reads online, she actually listens to her heart, looks at the person she's connecting with, and makes her own choice. And I think that sometimes one of the things we've forgotten how to do is hold on to the power that we do have in terms of how we make decisions.
I hear you. But if you're going for a job and your boss, your future boss, Googles you and finds something that's not that attractive online, you've already lost the job, right?
Absolutely. You probably haven't even gotten the interview.
Exactly.
You know, Jamie, I think, brought up the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, and there are some
Look at you with all your research.
Yes, I learned a thing or two working on this.
Showing off.
Well, thank you. And there are some Congress people in the U.S. who are questioning it, some saying that we need to oppose it, and I think that's a valid conversation to have. I think it's also valid that the attorneys general, 50 attorneys general in the U.S. are investigating big tech and looking at whether there's an antitrust case. I do think our data has almost become like a property, right? And we have property rights, but we don't seem to have rights over our own personal data and our own personal stories here in the U.S. And I'm thrilled that we are having this conversation. It is complicated, and certainly working on this play has demonstrated to me how complicated. All the perspectives of our guests are represented in the play that we have, and others. Also the perspective of a woman who was stalked. It's the former stalker in our play who wants to get this removed.
So Seema, I'm going to show your play one more time so we don't have to talk about it anymore. It is here on my laptop, currently showing it to the Arena Theatre in Washington, D.C. Seema, thank you. Moving on, Malika.
You talked, Seema, about data, and I think that's one of the things that people online bring up a lot, which is not having control over that data and not having access to it. Calvin here, watching live on YouTube, says, is it actually possible to erase your digital footprint in the modern media era? That is a question that's talked about in a video comment we received from someone who talks about the ways that it could be possible. This is Joseph Jerome. He's a privacy advocate, and here's what he told the stream.
Asking Google or some other data broker to erase our entire digital footprint from the internet is an impossible ask. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have basic rights to delete our information. The EU is correct that at some point in time, information about us just isn't relevant. You know, I don't know what my web browsing history from college would tell you about who I am today. So we need to have the ability to erase that type of information. And there are some tools to do that. Google put out a new tool that auto-deletes your location information after 3 or 18 months. You know, we ought to be thinking about rules and regulations that force these sorts of retention limits. I think that's really meaningful and, frankly, a practical right to be forgotten that would also benefit our privacy.
So, Jimmy, what do you make of that? Because he seems to say there are ways to do this. It's kind of already happening. How do we push that forward?
Well, again, with Google, the real question is how do you get Google to deprioritize those results? And there's only one way. We have to have a right to petition them. But we do have a law in California that's going to effect January 1 that says for personal information that companies can't share your data without your permission. You have a right to opt out, and they can't sell it without your permission. They can't deny you a service. So those type of privacy laws are a whole nother wave of laws that have to hit nationally. Ours is taking effect January 1. But what we're talking about today really is a different issue, I think. It's the issue of the balance between liberty and equality. You know, there's a lot of liberty on the internet, and we haven't balanced it out with equal rights. For instance, we did pass a law. President Trump did sign it, and it was because we had this website Backpage that was an online brothel. A lot of families with young children got caught in that. And basically, they shut it down, and they created a law that says if a website hosts third-party content and there's online sex trafficking, then you know what happens? They are basically liable. And if we start to make companies like Google more liable for counterfeit drugs, for illegal activity sold online through their sites, if we give them not the same standards that a newspaper publisher has, but more responsibility and accountability, they will self-police. But until we amend the Communications Decency Act to get more accountability, they will never do what's right, take down irrelevant information or illegal information.
Jamie, I hear you. Frankly, we're in the very last few seconds of this show. From somebody who's experienced having a online history that you'd rather have deleted or pushed further back so people don't see it on the first couple of searches, what would you suggest? Just in a sentence, what can we do?
It's all about balance. People make mistakes and they have to be punished, and there has to be it has to be on the internet. But in my case, 10 years later, 11 years later, it creates a persona. It creates a person that.
So what would you do? What do you want?
The power has to be taken away from Google, and there has to be an independent body that oversees it.
All right. Thank you so much, guest. Malika?
I will end with this tweet from Right to Remove, who writes in that the right to be forgotten is sort of a right to speech in terms of empowering people to have a say regarding their information. But as modes of speech become more sophisticated, we need more sophistication in defending and understanding free speech. Good way to wrap that up.
Thank you, guests. Thank you for everybody who's been following online and watching on TV. That's our show for today. See you next time. Take care.